So what I'd like to do is I'd like to go over chapter 4. Chapter 4 is a really key chapter. It's very important. Important, like, you know, everything in this book is important, but some of these chapters are kind of strategically important, let's put it that way. On the scale of, if you don't get this chapter, you know, it's going to be much, much harder for you. Versus if there's another chapter you miss out on, it's not going to be as bad. Okay. So this is what I mean by being important. Critical listening. It's a skill that if you get that skill, it will help you in life generally, not just in public speaking class. It's going to help you in writing a paper, doing any assignment, do pretty much everything. It will help you, job interview, anything you do in life. If you have a critical listening skill, it will help you. Because it is such a fundamental skill. So, critical listening. Critical listening is keyed to this idea of critical thinking. Why is critical listening important? Because when we listen in a critical way, we are thinking through all of the possibilities, all the implications of what the person is saying. And by thinking through, by analyzing what the message coming at us is, we're able to sort through things. We're able to say, this is true, that's not true. I know this for a fact, and I know that this person is not saying it 100%. I know they're not being genuine here, or here, this is really 100%. Like, I'm sure about this, but I'm not so sure about that. And so listening critically, you can't simply believe everything you hear. Because people will say all kinds of things to get a reaction out of you or something that they want out of you. So critical thinking is key, and critical listening is a part of that. So the authors of this book define critical thinking as the process of consciously examining the content and logic of messages to determine their credibility and rationality. Critical thinkers challenge ideas before they accept them. You know, by definition, children are not critical thinkers. Most children just accept the world the way it is. They look to adults, they look to authority figures, and the adult tells them, that's a crocodile. And they say, okay, that's a crocodile. That's it. Well, what if I pointed to a dog and said that's a crocodile? Well, actually, for a while, my kids will believe that it is a crocodile until somebody else will tell them, no, you've been misled. And so some later point in life, they might figure this out. But they're going to take it. And so the thing is that we have to be beyond that. We can't just believe what people say. And that's where critical thinking comes in. So in the beginning of this chapter, the authors introduce this idea of hearing and listening. Can you guys tell me the difference between hearing and listening?
Hearing, I use day by day, like somebody will talk with you, you hear, and listening. I feel like listening is kind of like you have to like concentrate, pay attention to learn something, and to attention to what he or she talking about, something.
You're onto it. You're right in that right. You're in that area exactly. What I hear you saying is that listening and hearing is different. You can hear something, but not understand it.
And hearing is more like a passive activity.
Yes.
And listening is active.
That's right. Hearing is passive. Hearing is a physiological activity. You may hear something and you have no idea what you heard, but you heard it. By listening, you're engaging your mind and you're analyzing, you're saying, what is it that I'm hearing? So it is it's a different activity. So just because you heard something, you come to class and you don't pay attention, yeah, you heard me. But you didn't listen, so you didn't get the material. So you walked away with still not knowing anything because you didn't pay attention. So it's a physiological sense. You know, there's a big difference between sort of say hearing and listening. That's where the thinking is involved. So there are different types of listening out there. Even if you're saying, all right, I'm paying attention, I'm listening, I'm focusing, I'm really tracking with you. There's different types of listening. The authors of this book talk about passive listening, They talk about drifting thoughts, physical distractions, trigger words, self-fulfilling prophecies. I mean, these are all distractions on us. Have you guys, when you read this chapter, did you find yourself that, hey, this is talking about me? The truth is, this is talking about all of us. We all have that. We all have this problem. So what is passive listening? That's where basically, you kind of go in and out. And you guys have your laptops with you, and I know sometimes I'm listening and you're hearing me, but you may just get more involved into whatever your laptop is telling you. And all of a sudden, you're tuning in and out. You missed part of the class. Drifting thoughts is something that, you heard me say something and it made you remember something that you needed to do. And so you quickly go and put a note to yourself to go do that. We all have these thoughts that kind of run away all of a sudden. And that's just part of being human. I mean, this is nothing, it's not like our fault. We can't help it. We have something that stimulates us and say, oh, I forgot this, and you kind of go into that direction. There are distractions, physical distractions. Sometimes you hear other students walk by in the hallway, they're talking loud, or cars passing, making noise, or guys are doing the lawn and they're cutting the lawn right outside because we're having a class, and it's like, to me, it's distracting, to you it's distracting, we can't really focus and pay attention. So there's a lot of issues that affect our ability to focus. And there are trigger words. Now this is one of the worst. Trigger words, when we hear certain words, they awaken certain emotional responses in us. There are trigger words that mentally affect us in a positive or a negative way. There are these words that we might hear that may just cause us to feel unhappy, or distract us immediately from whatever we're focused on and paying attention to. Why? Because they have emotional power. Because they take us somewhere where they do. And we can't control it because it's our mind, essentially. It takes a lot of focus to ignore a trigger word or something like that. So memories, that, for example, that happened in the past, certain trigger words, will just trigger a memory. It could be childhood, or it could be recent trauma that happened, or something like that. So some people hear trigger words and it bothers them when they hear a speech. They start almost like an internal debate with a speaker in their head. Have you ever done that? Somebody's speaking and they say something that really makes you mad. And it's like, no, you're wrong. And you start proving them wrong in your own head. Well, what happens is when you do that, you're not listening to the speech anymore. All you're focused on is proving them wrong in your head to yourself. It's like you're having a debate with that person in your head, while that person continues on speaking, completely not realizing that you're debating them in your head. So these things happen. And a lot of times, this is where our mind takes us, and unfortunately we can't control it. So, and then there's self-fulfilling prophecies. Now, this is a very interesting category, because people are we can be so prone to suggestions. We can actually set ourselves up for success or failure. Do you know that? Mm-hmm. If you tell yourself, this class is so boring, I hate it, this is the biggest waste of my time, every time I show up here, this guy goes on for hours and hours talking about nonsense that I don't understand, and you talk to yourself like that about this class. You do this long enough, you're going to come into this class, you're going to hate it. You know why? Because you set yourself up to hate it. You've created an attitude, and then you have that expectation that this is going to be terrible and awful and wrong, and everything's going to go wrong. And then you come in, and the slightest little thing that doesn't go your way, you say, there it is, there it started. And you start going and seeing what it is that you imagined this class will be, for example. So these are self-fulfilling prophecies. We do this in so many different scenarios in our life where we set ourselves up, sometimes for failure, sometimes for success. Sometimes the power of our positive thinking actually gets us places where we're saying, you know what, I can do this, I got this, I know this stuff. and you walk into a job interview and you nail it. Why? Because you're confident, because you know that you know what you're about to tell them about yourself is going to knock their socks off, and they're happy to receive a person like you because you just exude confidence. And all of a sudden they're like, I want this person to work for me because they're so positive. Look, how can I not do that? And they hire you. And maybe you're not the best and the best and most qualified, but you're happy about it and you're positive, and they're like, I like their attitude. Maybe they don't know everything there is to know. Maybe they don't have all this years and years of experience, but I really like their attitude. I think I'm going to hire them. So these self-fulfilling prophecies, they can go either way, but it is our perception sometimes that we kind of set these things up. Now, there are several techniques that the authors outline in this chapter for us, and as I already mentioned, that hearing is one thing, but listening is a little bit different. So there's a purpose in what is being said. So the authors suggest this: as we listen, if we're going to be active listeners, we are to determine the reason why we're listening. What is our goal in listening? Develop techniques that help us comprehend. So why am I listening to this, and how am I going to get this? How am I going to understand this? And then the third one is to design questions that help you evaluate the speech. So anybody who's giving a speech, essentially you can say, why are they saying what they're saying? How is it, and then start judging essentially the content. Does that make sense? I mean, this is a good strategy. So whether we're making a speech or we're listening to somebody else's speech, you have to be able, by listening, to identify their purpose. What is the purpose? Why? Why are we speaking? Why are we listening? And so there are several, there's a list of purposes over here. We have appreciative listening, discriminative listening, emphatic or therapeutic listening, listening for comprehension, and critical listening. Now, out of all of these, which ones totally make sense to you? If I asked you to explain to me 5 different types of listening styles, would you struggle to explain any of them to me is the question. I'm not trying to trip you up, but when I say appreciative listening, what does that mean? Well, what would if my purpose is to appreciate something I'm listening, that I'm listening just for enjoyment. I'm not really learning, right? It's not an information that's going to save my life or help me make my world a better place. I'm just listening for fun. I'm enjoying it. It's like entertainment. Then there's discriminative listening. That's where what is being said and how it's being said makes a big difference. It's kind of context. There's something more behind the message, because it's not even what I'm saying, it's how I'm saying it and what I am implying by what I'm saying. So that's a discriminative listening. That's where you have to discriminate between, let's say, the theatrics, and the actions that are happening, and say, wait a minute, there's something more going on here. And you kind of have to look behind the message to see what is my point. And so that happens a lot actually in our culture, believe it or not. Emphatic or therapeutic listening obviously is when you provide emotional support to a speaker. How many times you had to listen to your friend after something terrible happened, or maybe something terrible happened to you, and they listened to you as you sat there and complained and complained and complained. And sometimes it just helps to have somebody listen to you. And by saying, I understand, it's okay, you're right. That was terrible to happen. So, sometimes you just have to listen because you're providing emotional support to somebody. Okay? Or maybe you're in need of that emotional support. Listening for comprehension is a little bit different. That's more of a learning listening. When you're saying, okay, this is really important. The information that's coming at me is very important, and I need to understand it. This is helpful. This is useful. This is something that I need to process and understand. If I don't, I'm not going to be as well off as if I do. So you're much more invested in listening for all the little details and saying, I need to get this. And so that's for comprehension. And then critical listening. That is the most important type of listening, and that's what we're talking about right now, is critical listening. And it requires both to interpret and to evaluate the message, the authors say. It demands that you go beyond understanding the message to interpreting it and evaluating its strength and weaknesses. Now, please understand me, when I say critical, I don't mean criticize. I don't mean criticism. When we say critical listening or critical thinking, it's not about, oh, this is bad, bad, bad. You know, people used to the idea of the word criticize meaning say bad things about somebody or something, right? That is not what we're talking about. When we say critical in an area of academics, what we mean is that a person looks at all the aspects and evaluates it carefully. This is right, this is not right, that sounds believable, that sounds not so believable. This is possible, this is impossible. This is plausible, this is implausible. So these types of statements where we start evaluating the claims. That person makes a claim, you say, wait a minute, how can you even make a claim like that? Where would you even find the proof to substantiate that? And you could say, you know, the world is flat. And you say, okay, wait a minute, how can you prove that? Whatever claim that is being made, you say, I don't know if I'm believing it. And you have reasons for believing it or not believing it because you are taking what you already know of this world and you're hearing down this information, you're saying, does it match with what I already know? And that's being critical. That's thinking analytically. That's evaluating not just what person says, but the very meaning of what the person says. So critical listening for that reason is most important because one thing is to hear what a person said. Another thing is to understand what the person said. Oh, I heard you. Oh, I understand what you meant. But do I actually buy? Do I actually buy into? Do I actually agree with what you said? That's a different story. You can hear, you can comprehend, and still disagree and say that person is full of nonsense. That's critical listening versus another, types of listening where you just say, oh yeah, I got it, I understood it. I understood exactly everything you said. Yeah, I still don't agree with it. and that's okay. So sometimes you don't agree with it, sometimes you agree with it 100%, and you say, you're exactly right because A, B, C, D, E, F, G. See, that's just as critical listening. It's not necessarily you're wrong, it could be that, hey, you're right, but here's the reasons why you're right. And I know, because my common sense tells me, and the world that I understand and the best knowledge that I have of it confirms what you're saying is true. And if you could present even more evidence why it's true, then you become even more believable. So, those are our main purposes of listening. Does that make sense? Guys, you're with me? You're tracking with me? Okay. So do you understand why we're talking about critical listening being one of the most important types of listening? Because just comprehending, just saying, okay, I understand what you're saying, that's good, that's important. You actually cannot move to a critical stage until you hit that comprehension level. Because if you cannot understand what the person is saying, you cannot evaluate what they're saying, right? If you're not familiar with the idea they're expressing, let's say I'm standing over here and I'm making some sort of a point and I use a word or a term that you're not familiar with. Well, how can you evaluate whether what I'm saying is accurate or not accurate if you don't actually know and don't understand that term that I used? You can't, right? Logically, you can't. Has that ever happened to you? Where you're listening to somebody and they use the word and you say, I have no idea what they just said. Has that happened to you? Happens to me all the time. I hear words and I'm like, I'm not sure what that means. Or I may say, I know what this word means to me, but I'm not sure this is how they're using it. I think they're using it in a different way. That happens to you, right? So this is where you kind of hit that comprehension stumbling block where you're saying, wait a minute, I don't understand. And until I understand, I can't say that I agree or disagree with what you're saying. I can't decide whether it's good or bad or neither. So when you're listening for comprehension, one of the first questions that you have to ask yourself questions when you're listening. Because if you're not asking questions and not answering them in your head, how are you going to get to the bottom of what the person is saying? So one of the questions to ask is, what are the main ideas of the speech? What is this person talking about? I hear the words coming out of his mouth, and I hear the words, but those words must have meaning, and that meaning must be unified by some central thought that he's trying to convey. So, not just what the speech is about, but what is he saying about. So let's say I'm making a speech and you keep hearing the word race car, Formula One, NASCAR, you keep hearing those words and you're like, okay, so he's talking about cars. But I could be saying so many different things about cars. I could be talking about how that's the best sport in the world, or I can be talking about how it's the most dangerous sport in the world, or I can talk about the pollution that those cars produce, or the lives that people lose, or how crazy the fans are. My point could be not even related to cars, let's put it that way. But you keep hearing those keywords, so you say, okay, that's what his speech is about. No, my speech is not about that. I use those words, but I am driving at a particular meaning, a particular message. I have an idea. And so this is that idea of comprehensive listening. You're listening to comprehend what is my point. What am I trying to say by using all those words? And then another feature is how am I arranging the speech? A lot of times you hear people speak, and a good speaker will break up their speech into sections, into little bites. They'll say, first, then they'll say whatever they want to say. Then they say second, and they say whatever they say. And they say, and lastly. Now, if I say, and lastly, I'm not going anywhere. That you know that's the end. Because after lastly, there's not going to be, and one more, and one more, and another thing. See, that I'm not a good speaker if I keep doing that. Because if I said lastly, that means I'm done. That's my final point. So, but if I go first, second, third, fourth, fifth, there's more maybe coming. Organizing your speech, and a good speaker can organize their speech, and you're listening for that pattern. It helps you understand. It helps you to catch on what are the points that he's making, what are the issues that the speaker is raising as they are presenting to you the topic. And then the third question that you ask in comprehensive listening when you listen to comprehend is what supports the things that this person says. Because a person is going to make a statement, a person is going to make a claim. If I'm speaking about cars and NASCAR, I'm going to make a point. Well, my point cannot just be arbitrary unless I'm speaking about preferences and I'm just going to say, you know what, I really like that car engine and I really don't like that car engine. And the reason why I don't like that car engine, just because it looks ugly or something like that. Well, that's a preference, right? Preference is like, which coffee do you like? You like it this way or that way? Who can say that that's better or worse? That's not better or worse. It's just you like it this way and I like it that way. And we disagree, but that's okay. But if I said, oh, this engine is better than this engine, well, I'm actually basing it on some sort of a science. I'm basing it on reasons. I have a very particular set of reasons why I think this engine is better than the other one. Do you see what I mean? So what support do I offer when I make a particular point? Sometimes people will make a point and they will offer zero support. Zero support. Now, they just may not be a good speaker, right? Or maybe they don't have any support. Maybe what they're saying is really empty. And as you're listening and comprehending their speech, you say, okay, that was a fine point, but he offers no support. I can't think of any support. It must not be true. He might be just pulling my leg. He might just be saying things and that's all it is. There's no meat to it. The point is empty. He has nothing to stand on when he makes this claim. So that's the question is, do you find yourself doing this when you're listening to somebody speak? Because if you're listening to comprehend, if you're listening for a purpose, if you're listening for a reason of learning something, understanding something, sorting through something, then you must be asking yourself these questions. Okay, what is the main idea? How are these ideas arranged? How many ideas are there? And do these ideas have any support? Because if you can't answer those questions from the speech, well, that person may not just be a good speaker. They just may not be communicating what they need to be saying. And that's okay, because some people are not good speakers. And that's it, they're ineffective. They're ineffective. We should be able to tell a person who is an effective speaker from an ineffective speaker. We should be able to, by simply asking these questions. Because if these questions are not being answered, then we know we have somebody standing between us who's just blabbering on, but they don't have a structure, they haven't thought it through, they're just saying whatever they're saying, they don't have a point, it's just whatever comes in their head, and in the end, they don't have any proof to substantiate whatever it is they're saying, because they didn't prepare or they didn't think it through. They didn't think ahead to provide some sort of a underscoring, some sort of foundation to a claim that they're going to make or anything like that. Because that's what we do when we listen in order to learn and to understand something. In many ways, we have to be convinced of the truth of something if we are to accept it. Okay, does this make sense? Because what I want you guys to do is ask questions. If there are words in this text that you don't get, if there are terms that are being used that you're not fully connecting with, if I'm giving you an explanation and it doesn't make sense, raise your hand, let me know, ask a question, okay? And we'll get to the bottom of it. So the reason why I keep asking you, do you understand, not because I think you don't understand. I am asking to make sure that I'm giving you an opportunity to say, excuse me, Professor, I would like a little bit more clarity on that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. That's a normal part of learning. It's a normal part of thinking through something, is to say, all right, how would that work in real life? I think I understand the concept, but help me understand it better by giving me an example or something like that. And so, if that's what you need sometimes, ask me. I'll see if I can come up with an example. It might not be a great one, but I'll try to come up with an example or something. Because in abstract, some of these ideas may be hard to grasp. I try to come up with concrete examples. As you can see, a lot of times I'm just coming up with stuff on the fly to help you make sure that we're on the same page, that we're tracking. Okay. Good. So if you're with me, then let's flip with me to page 46, 47. There's a concept that the authors introduce on those pages that's kind of important. They call it the RRA technique. Review, relate, and anticipate. Review, relate, and anticipate. Question. Do you understand what is RRA technique? Okay, because if you understand it, then you should be able to explain it to me. Can you explain an RRA technique in your own words? Because this is your homework, so I know you guys read it, I know you know it, but I need to make sure that you understand it, because if you can explain it to me, even in your own words, it doesn't have to be perfect, I should be able to get it. Anybody wants to explain RRA technique for everyone else's benefit?
RRA, the first R stands for review.
Yes, review.
So, which means you review what the speaker just said.
Exactly.
And the second R means relate. So in this step, you should relate what you just listened from the speaker to what you already know.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the last step, called anticipate, is you kind of expect what the speaker will say next. Anticipate what the speaker might say next.
Exactly. Very good. That was very well explained. What do you guys think? Well explained? Did you get it?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So when you review, you're essentially saying what I'm saying. If I'm the speaker, you're in dialogue with me. Let's say we're just talking, and I'm explaining something to you. Say I'm your boss. and you come to work and I say, oh, we got this new piece of machinery, and I need you to do this, this, and this, and this, and this, and I give you all this explanations, and you say, wait a minute, let me review. So what you want me to do is, and then you go through and you review. This is what you said, this is what you said, this is what you said, and I'm going to say, yeah, you know what, one more thing I forgot. And I'll add something else. Reviewing process actually helps to clarify the message. Because how do I know you understood me if you cannot tell me what I just said to you? If you can't repeat to me what I said to you, then you don't really understand what I said. See what I mean? So reviewing my words is a way for you to make sure that you understood my words correctly. You're confirming the message that you received correctly. Then to relate, the second R, is when you say, all right, if you want me to do this and this and this and this on this new piece of machinery we just bought for our office, you know it's going to affect this and this and this and that. You know, you gave me the password, but what about 15 other people? Do they have their own passwords too? And how are we keeping up with the security of this? Because if everybody's got a password, then how do we know who's going to break it? How are you going to track it all? You know? They're like, are they individual passwords? Well, using the same password, you're starting to take what I gave you and you're starting to relating it to the real world, to the situation that you're dealing with. You start thinking through the implications. Okay, this is what you said. That means it could go this way, it can go that way. You start think of possible scenarios that might become a problem, or that you may need clarification on of what it is that I said. So because all you're trying to do is clear out the expectations of what it is I want you to do per se. So if I'm your boss and I'm talking to you on the job and I'm giving you instructions of how to do something, you're like, okay, well, I want to do my job well, so let me see if I can understand you correctly, and let me see how I understand how this new device ties into my job, and why you're telling me this to begin with, right? So you relate it to the real world, you relate it to the relevant questions in your life, you relate it to your particular experience, and then you anticipate. Now, anticipation is a little bit more tricky, because as you are listening to me speak and giving you instructions, you're already anticipating questions. You're saying, what about that? Oh, what about this? What about that? You're saying, oh, he said, first do this, second do this, but don't ever do that. Why did he say that? You're saying there must be some kind of a problem when I do that. So you're thinking through what I'm going to say next. You anticipate that if I explain this function, and I explain that function, then the next thing I'm going to do is explain that function. And if I don't explain it, then you say, wait a minute. And you ask it, and then clarity comes in. So sometimes a person who is not even such a great communicator can be helped by you using that RRA technique with them, because they may have gaps in their communication, and you're helping them out by sort of say, clarifying to yourself what it is that they're trying to say. You're helping them. It's okay. I mean, not all of us can think of all things. Sometimes to us, things are redundant or things are self-explanatory. They don't need to be explained, but another person say, wait a minute, I need a little bit more clarity here. So a lot of times, that's what would happen, you know, in the job. People are given directions and then they're being said, okay, now explain to me what I asked you to do. And if they cannot explain, that means they didn't understand the directions. And that means we have a problem, because that job is not going to get done. It's not going to get done right. So the same thing in speech. When you hear a speech, when you hear a person speaking, if you're thinking critically, you can go over in your head what they're saying and say, all right, so what they're saying is, and as they're saying, you're analyzing what they're saying in your head, and then you're saying, well, if what they're saying is true, then this also must be true, that this also must be true, then that also must be true. So you start testing, what we call testing the hypothesis. Because if what I said is right, then it will be right here, and it will be right here, and it will be right there, and it will be right in all these different situations. And if it's not right, then you say, wait a minute, there's a hole in that theory. That's not going to work here, that's not going to work there. That's your mind working and analyzing my message, analyzing whatever it is I'm saying. And as you're listening to me speak, you're actually, if you know the topic, if you know where I'm going with this, you can almost predict what I'm going to say next. You may not know the content of what I'm going to say next, but you know that the next thing he's going to talk about is that. Or if I make a claim to something, then you know that the next thing I'm going to do is probably give you some evidence, some backup for that claim. So you anticipate my backup. You anticipate my evidence. But if my evidence doesn't come, your mind tells you, wait a minute, that's a point with no evidence. He's not substantiating it. So maybe he forgot, maybe he didn't want to say it, maybe I'll ask a question, but at least your mind files it away of, wait a minute, that's an empty statement, a statement without any sort of proof or evidence. So I need something behind that. I need some sort of reasoning to follow that. So you can anticipate what the person is going to say next. I mean, this is really terrible, but sometimes when I watch movies, I know exactly what's going to happen in the first few minutes of the movie. It takes only first few minutes, and I know how it's going to end. Never have seen the movie, never read the book, just know exactly what's going to happen. Why? Because it's predictable. I can anticipate. I know how a good story is told. And by beginning a story a certain way, I know where the author is going to take the story, and I can anticipate how it's going to end. It's terrible. It ruins all movies, but that happens when you understand how literature is made and how stories are told. And so you start anticipating. And so in speech it's the same thing. You know, if people begin this way, they're going to end this way. Remember how we talked about how in your introduction, you tell people what you're going to say. In your body, you're flushing that out. And in conclusion, you're just repeating what you've already said in the beginning. So if I heard your introduction correctly, I already know, I anticipate in your conclusion what you're going to say. I know you're going to drive that same point again, only now you gave me a lot more reasons to actually believe you. So, boom. That's the same idea of, review, relate, anticipate. That RRA technique is very, very powerful. And when people learn how to use it, some people use it intuitively, it becomes a really powerful tool for comprehension as you listen and for analytical listening.